Serious, what is the creepiest thing you don't talk about in your profession? I'm a mailman, and sometimes people's houses just creep me out. Sometimes you walk up to a really rundown place with their mailbox hanging sideways and you just get a bad feeling. Like bad things happen here. It's also creepy how bad some people's houses smell, and I can smell that shit from outside. If you're a hoarder with 20 cats, I can smell all the cat piss and sweet rotting smell as soon as I go up your walkway. Also, delivering mail to sketchy businesses that are clearly fronts for something else is never really fun. Can make you pretty uneasy. I run pools. We make sure our swimming instructors have good training in spotting the signs of child abuse, because we see so much more of your kid's body than most other folks in their lives. Bathing suits don't do much to cover up suspicious bruising. Honestly, the fact that most stuff we deal with causes cancer. Generally, you can be quite safe as a chemist, but it's the long-term exposure that's an issue. Being somewhat not safe over time causes lots of issues. Sure, you always hear of someone who got a liter of solvent to the face, or got a toxic powder on their arm and was fine, but it's the sum of all your exposures, not the day-to-day stuff, that kills you. Be smart and be safe. Wear gloves, wear a lab coat, don't breath anything in, and work in a fume hood with everything. There are a lot of nasty ass bugs in shipping. In the work comp insurance industry, each body part has a predetermined monetary value. So if you lost, say, a thumb or a foot on the job, they just check their price list and cut a check. Sometimes there are different values for the same body part depending on if the part that was lost came from your dominant hand or side. Another fun fact is that it can be cheaper to insure roofers who work on 5 or 10 plus story jobs than those that work on lower structures, because the insurance companies figure in the event of a fall they'll only have to cut a simple check for a preset death benefit for the high-rise workers. It's when someone falls from just a couple stories that leads to years of expensive medical treatments and disability payments, since they're much more likely to survive. I've always found it a little bit creepy how easily our lives and body parts can be reduced to just a few numbers and dollar signs. The amount of dead bodies you have to deal with walking on. Property management for 5 communities with 2,400 people. 95% college students. 60% of those in high stress, high octane majors. I've walked into 4 suicides in 5 months, and these have been people I've gotten to know, worked with to cater to interests. I couldn't imagine it was going to be like this, but I probably should. IDK how to fix any of it, but it makes for a hard time now and again. The fact that human organs are shipped, like regular packages at FedEx. I see them almost every day. It's most a company called CryoLife, I think. It's for organ donation. But we are very professional and careful with these packages, in particular for obvious reasons. I work for a company that, amongst other services, provides carpet cleaning. Vacuuming is one of the easiest corners for janitorial providers to cut, so it rarely ever gets done to adequate levels. This means that office carpeting is absolutely filled with dirt, skin flakes, and literally any other nasty tiny thing you can picture. Carpeting is like a sponge filter, and if you don't clean it out regularly it gets ducking nasty and can majorly impact indoor air quality. Sick building syndrome can be caused by carpeting alone. Also, people in general are nasty too. In one night, in one facility, my team cleaned up piss, vomit, and blood stains on the carpet, wearing PPE of course. Close bracket. The amount of skid marks we clean off office chairs is bonkers too. I wish I never knew this, but I was a hairdresser for a while, and at one point was working in a not so good area. I had just started at this new salon, and the owner warned me to watch out for an older man who would come in after a young girl. That in and of itself was kind of strange, but nothing too jarring. It's also important that we had almost no staff. Do I work many 6 to 7 hour shifts by myself? Well, one day a young woman, maybe 25 years old, came in, and an older man behind her, who said absolutely nothing. I took her to the chair, and like everyone else, asked her what she wanted. She pulled me close to her, and said, "That man there thinks I'm getting my head shaved. He gave me $100, but just trim it." I look back at the man, and there he was, starting to masturbate in the corner. I told him to leave and called the police. The girl started crying in the chair. It was by far the creepiest thing I've seen. I never knew people had fetishes like that. I wish I never knew. I drive trains. Statistically speaking, a driver in my country will drive over 2 humans during a career. What really haunts you is the sound. It's a loud thud. I don't know about creepy, but a lot of dietitians have had eating disorders. It can attract people who are 1. Obsessed with food and health, and 2. Looking for better ways of staying as thin as possible. As a teacher, we know, but don't talk about it, how many of our kids have very ducked up lives. We know which kids have emotionally abusive siblings. We know which kids have no friends. We know which kids' parents pay no attention to their accomplishments. When it's something that crosses the line, sexual abuse, unsafe living conditions, etc., we will report it to CPS. Hell, as far as I'm aware, we are required to in every state, certainly are in mine. But there are so many horrible, horrifying things that kids have to go through that don't cross the line into reportable territory. For example, one of my students 2 years ago was the only boy out of 5 children. His mother, her husband having walked out after baby #5 was born, took all of her aggression out on my student. It was never abusive, to our knowledge. But he confided in me that his mother just didn't care about him. Any accomplishment of his sisters was praised and celebrated. His accomplishments? Ignored. The kid was one of the sweetest boys I have ever taught. All he wanted was to make his mother proud of him. She couldn't have cared less though, because to her he was just a reminder of the man who left her. The kid was emotionally neglected and starved for positive attention. We also know about the kids who have had seriously ducked up shit happen to them. Rape, molestation, severe physical abuse, even torture. One girl I taught was raped by her father and her uncle for years. Her uncle moved out of the country and her father is in prison. The situation has been resolved legally, but she is still facing years and years of psychological problems. So, to end my rambling, the creepiest thing about my profession that we don't talk about is how many of our students are messed up and facing years of therapy because of things beyond their control. The amount of suicide among doctors. Physicians have among the highest rates of suicide worldwide, but I didn't understand how significant it was until I was in the field. I assumed it wasn't a big issue. The career seemed great with prestige, high job security and income. And it is great, but I didn't know about working 60 days in a row, operating after being awake for 72 hours on call, cutthroat competition in training bottlenecks, the constant expectation and pressure to be the best, and know it all from seniors and patients alike, the harassment and bullying from colleges that eat their young. Now that I'm working in hospital networks, I don't go more than a couple of months without hearing about another doctor who attempted or committed suicide. There is more open discussion about the crisis, but most remains unspoken. Many doctors in my country won't disclose or seek help for their mental health problems out of fear they'll be reported and have restrictions on their license. And if you are taken to hospital for the suicide attempt, the field is small enough that your colleagues and friends will hear about it, no matter how much staff maintain confidentiality. I visited a friend in Aiku who attempted suicide, and he was mortified that he had been transported to the hospital he was employed in. Everyone knew and he moved across the country, and you hear about funerals for an untimely passing of a 30-something-year-old doctor, while nobody talks about how or why they died. We are very uncomfortable talking about suicide. The number of deaths and injuries. Industrial maintenance isn't a really safe career path. I personally know 4 people that have been seriously injured and 2 that were killed on the job. Sometimes when we deliver a stillborn baby that passed a while ago, the head may come off in delivery. Fortunately, it usually doesn't. Its security at a lot of places is a joke. You'd be horrified how some high profile hold a lot of your personal data. There isn't really an emphasis on security. Sure, they do just enough, but it's more aimed at protecting their image and whatnot than your data. The amount of suicide rates in the veterinary profession. 8 years after graduation and 2 of my classmates have committed suicide. High stress, not fantastic pay, poor coping mechanism, bad clients, etc. will wear anyone down after a time. The smell of burning human flesh. I'm an industrial welder and occasionally have a molten blob of steel lined on exposed skin. We don't mention it outside of work because of obvious reasons. Trucker here. Rate by trainers, particularly men, on female trainees is kind of an issue that has only really started to come to light. Not really creepy, but I work at a wood shop and it is an absolute OSHA disaster. Safety guidelines are rarely, if ever, enforced and corners are cut constantly to get stuff built on time. I'm talking fire extinguishers buried behind scrap wood and other things, almost zero use of safety equipment, and just a general disregard for what should be standard practice. Really the only reason injuries are rare is because the vast majority of people who work here are experienced and know their sheet. I work for a student loan company. A lot of people's backward repayment plan is to pay the absolute minimum for their loans as long as possible and then die. It's usually for older people, but I see it with folks in their 20s 30s also. Their interest is sometimes more than they make in a month. I can't tell you how many people I've had to reassure that their kids won't have to pay the loan if the parent dies. It usually can't be discharged with bankruptcy either. It ducking sucks that death is the only way out for people. We literally have to have a protocol for how to handle someone threatening to commit suicide so they don't have to pay it. Military. A lot of people I served with were really ducking dumb, including officers. Also, cancer rates among retirees are insanely high. I work in TV news, and some viewers can be very creepy. People subconsciously feel like they know us because they see us every day in their homes. Some of the mail my coworkers receive is so questionable. Like one guy, a well-known and beloved weatherman, regularly gets postcards from the same dude that hates him and berates him. Another guy acts as if he actually knows one of our weekend anchors in his letters talking about how they used to go to various concerts together. Nope. Once I opened a package with all these random objects. Band-aids, layers, a pair of socks, conversation hearts, and 5 valentines each detailing how the person would storm the building. Once I did a story vaguely related to vaping, and within minutes a guy tracked down my personal Facebook and sent me 3 videos cussing me out and a long rant about how I was a pissant whore and a ducking moron. Worked 10 PM to 8 AM shift at a gas station. The number of construction guys, factory workers, big truck drivers, basically heavy machinery guys who buy 2 pints of vodka, 1 for each pocket, every morning at 6 AM and their way to work is quite scary. I work in an eco-friendly importer who imports, well, eco-friendly products that replace disposable or single-use products, especially plastics. The amount of plastic involved in production, shipping, storing, and packing those items is insane. It's just all stripped from the finished product before it lands in the customer's hands. There's also issues with ordering from abroad. Everything from factory waste to the fuels to get it here. It's really sad, and nobody addresses it. Ever. It's not talked about. We just strip off the plastic and toss it before shipping to the customer. Not really creepy but sad, and so very obviously ignored. The amount of teachers who sleep with students. Every school I've been at there has been a story of Mr. So and so got fired for having sex with one of the students a few years back. I've talked to teachers who make remarks about 15-year-old girls' bodies that would be embarrassing to retell. I've heard rumors of students who get a little unwanted attention from some teachers. Improper stuff happens far more than you hear about on the news. I'm a homeless outreach worker. You'd be surprised how many of your friends from high school end up homeless. Here's a small sampling of what I can say about the legal profession. Personal injury attorneys who advertise are typically good businessmen and terrible attorneys. They will do a great job negotiating with the insurance company, but can't litigate a case to save their life. Home cooking is a real thing. You are generally better off hiring an attorney who regularly practices in a certain circuit or district than hiring someone your friends recommend that would be considered an out-of-town attorney. The suicide rate among attorneys is incredible. The rate of drug and alcohol abuse is terrifying. This is what happens where you work in an adversarial environment with no formal mentoring programs and are forced to work 80+ hours a week to keep your law firm partners happy, or have to take cases you don't know how to handle, just to afford to keep your doors open as a small firm attorney. I had been in practice less than 3 years before the first of my classmates did. Many small firm attorneys can't afford to retire. They have to work until they die. You'll see attorneys in court that can barely walk, but they keep taking cases, so they can afford to live. It's very sad. The money isn't there like people think. My first 3 years of practice I made less than $35k per year. I was in practice for 6 years before I made more than $50k gross in a single year. And I was not some sort of anomaly. I had classmates who have been in practice over 10 years and still make less than $50k a year.